Well, thank you all so much for coming here today to my book launch. It really means a lot to me that you're here. We have about 40 people who sign up for the in-person event and over 80 people for the virtual event. So it's a huge turnout. The virtual one, there are people coming from India, UK, Brazil, you name it, the list goes on. So the sign up, whoa. Oh, I think this one might be low on battery. Okay.
Is that
Hello,
working?
hello. This one is working. Yeah. We might need to talk to just upstairs. Okay. Maybe we'll come back with a better one. Yeah, so the number of signups tells me that the world is long overdue for this content on the founder to PM journey. I wrote this book because in 2019, when my co-founder and I decided to shift our startup to a side hustle, I decided that I wanted to get a full-time gig in product management. So naturally, I went online and I Googled how to transition from being a founder to a product manager. Nothing came up. I was so surprised because from talking to founders, I know that this is a very common transition, but no one has written anything about it. So after 2 months of hustling and trial and error, I eventually got my first product management gig at Oscar Health. Many of you are here today, thank you for coming. So to help other founders, after having been on the job for a couple of months, I decided to write about my transition journey so that others can learn from it. I wrote the blog post on Medium. The blog post did really well, and many people DM'd me. And many of my readers are actually here today, online or in person. And I just want to say thank you because your questions and your DMs really encouraged me to want to write a longer version of this journey so that more people can learn from it. Publishing a book has always been a childhood dream of mine, and I'm really excited that I'm doing it today. So before we get going, I just want to dedicate this book to my mom. For her never-ending optimism that has taught me how to find a way through all of my roadblocks. For those of you here today, you'll have the chance to get the pre-release link to buy the book. I'll share more details at the end of this session. For those of you in person, you can also buy printed copies, and this is the only time where I'll be selling printed copies. After today, it's ebook and online only. So now, let's get started. So today we're going to spend the first half of the time on the job search, what the transition journey is like, and then the second half on what are your key learnings once you've been on a job. I know we have people looking to become PMs and also founders who are already PMs. So we're going to split into two, and we're going to spend 20 minutes on Q&A. Many of you have submitted questions on Eventbrite, so I try to incorporate as many of those questions as I could, so hopefully all of your questions will get answered by the end of the day. Anything before we get started? Cool, I hope the second mic comes soon, but we'll make do with this. So the first question for the panel, I'm just going to start with an intro. So tell us a brief history of your career and where you are now. And I'm happy to go first. The other mic is back. Okay, so I'll continue. So as you know, I'm Hannah. So after college, I started my career in management consulting at Deloitte Consulting. I spent 2 years there, and I was always building stuff on the side while I was in my job in consulting. And eventually I wanted to have more time for my side projects, so I moved into contracting for about a year, and then I took my business full-time after that. I spent full-time on my business for about 2 years, and then that was when my co-founder and I decided to shift it to a side hustle. So that's when I transitioned into PM. I was a PM at Oscar Health for 2 years, and then now I am doing part-time product consulting and also spending more time on my startup, which was the one that went to a side hustle, and then now it's becoming more of like a main thing again. So happy to go more into that throughout the night. Yeah, you want to go next, Abhi?
Hey guys, I'm Abhi, and so I was a CS major in college, and then I started a company right after college, which ended up getting acquired. And I didn't immediately go into product management at that point. I actually did contracting and consulting for a lot of early stage startups at that point. And that's kind of how I discovered that I really like doing more product stuff, because I was taking on larger projects where, you know, I was hiring designers and devs and kind of being the product manager for these projects. So yeah, I realized I wanted to do that like full time, and so a few years ago, I decided to start looking for a full-time product management gig. And I ended up at this division of ADP, where I was a platform product manager for a couple of years. And since then, I've also been a head of engineering at a startup, which I feel like I learned a lot of the lessons I learned from product management were super valuable there, because I feel like a head of engineering was doing a lot of the glue work that product managers would do as well. And right now I'm working on some new startup ideas, as well as doing some engineering and product consulting with early stage startups.
See if this one works. Yep. Hey everyone, my name is Raj. I actually went to high school at Hannah, so it's really cool to see her journey, like from being in high school, actually went to college with her too, think about it. So we went to high school and college together, and now she's doing this event. So I think before I introduce myself, I just want to give you a shout out. Like, this is not easy, this is so cool, you know, like to think that you'd be doing this when we were in high school, I would have never even imagined it. So actually, she was always on top of the ball, so I'm not gonna take that past her. Quick intros. Right now, I'm a PM at Google. I specifically work on Google for Education. Right after college, I was a high school math teacher. I did Teach for America. I was very passionate about education. But very quickly, I realized teaching in class is extremely demanding and very, very difficult. And at the same time, I was falling in love with the tech side of things. So I moved from Baltimore to the Bay Area, joined an early stage tech startup, did that for about 3 years. After that, tried to build my own startup, just like Hannah talked about the journey that we'll probably get into in a little bit. Really loved my time building collaborative prep. Unfortunately, I had to sunset that, got introduced to some education folks at Microsoft, started working on their product called Flipgrid, and then left Flipgrid about 3 months ago, and now I'm at Google. So if anyone in there, in the crowd is very interested in education, specifically within product, come talk to me.
Hey, so let's see. Been in this space for about 10 years, was also a computer science major as an undergraduate, and started it was a health tech company, my senior year of college as part of one of my class projects. And I think, where I was at Harvard, there were some really great connections to the Boston entrepreneur ecosystem, because they were so desperate to not lose people to places like Silicon Valley. So I met a lot of other great entrepreneurs in the area, and they helped me figure out how to turn the idea into a company. So did that for a year, went through the Techstars Accelerator, ultimately ended up parting ways with my co-founder. And at that point, that's when essentially it was like I was sort of acqui-hired by a larger health tech startup that had also gone through Techstars in the class before us. And so when I came into that company, I didn't actually have a formal product role, but very quickly moved into it. And since then, have done product in a couple different environments, including as a Presidential Innovation Fellow under the Obama administration. After that, I was at Google for 6 years, and then as of April this year, I joined Shopify.
Awesome, thank you all for sharing. My next question is, so tell us about the moment when you realized it was time to shift gears from your startup to looking for a job in product management.
I can go first. I don't know that I was looking for a job in product management, but and part of that was also because I was only 1 year out of school, and having been, CEO I think the big companies wouldn't have known what to do with me because that wasn't really the profile they were looking for APM programs. But again, having, I think built a good network in Boston, I didn't actually, I think, formally apply anywhere. I just sort of talked to everyone I knew about, what are the next steps? Would you hire me? Who would hire me? What do you think I should do? And so I kind of talked to a few different companies about like a range of roles, including like sales, because I had done that as a CEO, as well as engineering, because I had a technical background, and product. And I think when I started at the company that I did join, Ginger.io, I was nominally an engineer, but after about 2 months of that, it was very clear that they had product needs, and so I sort of snuck in that way. But I mean, I think I had always been interested in product, but like with that background and being only a year out of school, it was a hard sell on a resume. But I think moving within a company is a pretty common path.
So what was the role you got hired into?
I don't even know that there was an official title. It was like probationary period, maybe software engineer, but like, I mean, it was very informal. There was like, oh, you can work on some of the data stuff with engineering, and oh, here's like, well, maybe you want to run a study, write a plan for that. And so I think it was about after 2 months, I was like, hang on, there's not really a clear definition of why a consumer would ever use your product. You're just trying, you want the data from them, you have a provider side for clinicians, but there's not much value for an actual patient. Maybe we can improve that. And they're like, oh, great, so you solve that. And that's essentially then, they're like, I guess you're a product manager now.
Awesome, thank you for sharing that. And so Julia was talking about how that she switched into this role about a year after college. From my experience, when I was looking, I was probably 4 years out of college, so I probably had a little bit more experience, and I'll share my experience with that. So the time I discovered was the right time. So my co-founder and I were basically at the crux of, we either need to become a VC-backed company and go raise some money, or we need to bootstrap it because we're running out of our runway. And we decided, oh my gosh, this is also out of battery. Yeah, so at that junction, we decided that given our market size and the space that we were in, it didn't make sense to be a VC-backed company or to raise a ton of money for it. So we decided to shift it to a side hustle. And I was most interested in the product management role because when I was building my startup, the stuff I enjoyed the most doing was talking to the users, figuring out what their needs were, and then like go back and talk to my co-founder and figure out a solution, prototype, and then like show it to them, and then seeing that like aha moment in their eyes. Those were my favorite parts, and as I was looking through the different options, like okay, so it seems like product management will be the right role for me.
I guess for me, I didn't really transition from being a founder to a product manager. I was doing consulting with different startups at that point. I think for me, it was mostly when I was working with these startups as a consultant, I had to deal a lot with like hiring and like resourcing and actually finding the people to like build the products. So I was interested in like working more longer term on one particular product as opposed to like having to switch every 2 or 3 months. And also like not having to deal with the overhead of hiring, because I think what I really wanted to do at that point was work on products and like really focus on like what to build and how to build it, as opposed to dealing with all the resourcing and things from consulting. But yeah, I will say that I think a lot of the companies that I talked to about becoming a product manager were particularly interested in my founder experience, even more than my consulting, because I think, especially with smaller stage startups, it translates really well to being a product manager just without having to deal with like, investing or hiring and all of those functions, and just focusing purely on product. So yeah, that was my transition.
Yeah, I would say, to answer your question directly, Hannah, I think I knew it was time to pull the plug because I was running out of money. Quite frankly, I had set a time for myself. I said, okay, I'm going to dedicate 2 years, maybe 2.5, for myself to get some sort of product market fit. And hopefully that magnitude increases over time. And I think as I was trying a lot of different things and they weren't working, some were working, it's up and down like roller coaster ride. So eventually when I hit my 2-year mark, 2.5-year mark, I said, okay, I think it might be time for me to just step away from it and then figure out, maybe I want to come back to this later on, but for now I need to go back, make some money, just realistically, and then come back to it. And I would say I wasn't looking into product management either. I don't think that was something that I was like, oh, PM now. But to Hannah's point, it was very natural. The stuff I really enjoyed was, shipping something small, watching users use it, and then realizing, wow, they hated what we just built, or no one's really using this. Why is it that we designed it this way and everyone's using it a completely different way? So those are the challenges that kind of intrigued me. And I figured with all the opportunities that are out there, PM probably made the most sense. So kind of like your journey, I had the same thing. It wasn't directly PM, but based on the work that I enjoyed, PM made the most sense.
Awesome. And did anybody consider any other roles?
All right, we share this.
Yeah, we'll
Just
share
take that mic.
Oh, okay.
So you should pass that to them, the mic you're holding.
That mic's not doing well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's turn it off.
I'd say as an undergraduate, I think I was also really interested in data science, but I think the nice thing about product management is there's so many types of product management roles that I've often been able to find one that lets me still do a lot of data work. So I mean, in my current role, same I think as my last team at Google, in Google Maps, maybe 15% of my time happens to be, looking at data and pulling data. And so I think that's the nice thing is, I also did consider engineering, but I think I got much more excited about data problems. But that doesn't mean that, by choosing PM, you're saying goodbye to those other types of passions. And I know the same thing for people who also have a love of design, or, there's also PMs more oriented towards, partnerships, and they're not technically doing sales, but, if you really like talking to people and, those kinds of customer conversations, there are PM roles that also let you do a lot of that. So I think for me, it was probably data the most.
For me, it was PM, so I wasn't considering other roles at that time. I think, to your point, PM covers a lot of, whether it's data science or design, or just talking to customers, getting that research point of view. So for me, it was looking for something in PM, but for me, it was more so the domain. I was very passionate about education. Startup I was building was related to education, so I was looking for teams that were hiring PMs that were focused on education, whether it's early stage or big tech. I wasn't picky at that point, but for me, domain was my main proxy.
Actually, I would also add, because it can be so hard to transition into PM, I think, your experience with bringing your domain knowledge to transition, I think it was similar for me with the health tech, where the company I ended up at, Ginger.io, they value my domain experience also in health tech, and so I think it's like either you have previous PM experience or maybe you have domain experience, and both of those can be a way to enter the role.
I totally echo that too. I think when I was interviewing and applying to companies, so my company is called TheShareWay, and it's in the nonprofit space. So I was getting recruiters from companies that do nonprofit tech, and they were reaching out to me. So I think that's definitely something to leverage your domain expertise for if you want to make switch into PM. And then for me, I also looked at go-to-market roles or program manager roles because I spent 2 years at Deloitte in strategy and operations consulting, so some of the strategy and ops role were also interesting. So I briefly looked at those, and I ultimately decided on PM, but that's something else you all might be interested as well to consider.
I think it was just PM. So.
Okay, great. So what challenges did you face when you tried to make the switch, and how did you overcome it? I'm happy to go first on this one. So I think the biggest challenge was not really know what I was getting myself into and what the interview process will be like, because it's my first time. And one of the things that I quickly learned is, as a founder, I've done a lot of the product stuff, right? Like interviewing users, figuring out what they need, prototyping, showing to them, iterate, but I didn't know how to talk about it. So I remember very clearly in one of my first interviews, I was asked the question, tell me about your product development process. And I was like, okay, well, usually I talk to my co-founder about what we want to push, then we go out there and talk to users. They tell us what their problems are, we go back home, we like brainstorm it, and then prototype it, and then we go back to them a couple weeks later and see them use it, and then see their reactions, and then we iterate and improve on it. And now that I've been a PM for probably 3 years now, like that was such a bad answer. The PMs in the room can tell. So
Mine was worse.
So then after that interview, I was like, oh my gosh, I totally bombed because I finished my answers in 30 seconds. And I went home and I read Inspired, I Googled product development process just to see how people talk about it. And now that I were to answer that question again, what I would do is, first I would do user research, looking at quantitative data that we have on our website, and also do qualitative interviews with users. From there, I will organize a brainstorm meeting with my team to generate ideas across teams. And when that's done, we will rank all of our ideas on impact and effort. And based on that system, we can come up with a set of top ideas. And as a team, we could pick one. And then I'll go off to write a product requirements doc, PRD. I did not know that that's a thing. I was writing it, but I didn't call it PRD. And then from there, I will share it with engineers, get their feedback, and once it passes, and they plan the sprints, how many sprints, then I'll go off and work with product marketing, data science, to plan the metrics and figure out how to market this, So I think one of the challenges was I didn't realize I had to talk that way. So it's a challenge, but it's a bonus too, because you've done a lot of these things, and it's now just about packaging yourself and learning how to talk about it. So.
I would say the hardest part, like to answer your question, challenge-wise, for me was, it's kind of like your startup is your baby, and it's like, it's your child, and you're just, and I understand in your book you talk about like, they don't want to hear the details about like, you know, the emotional stuff that's going through. But it's really hard not to, right? Because you were working on this product, you're so attached to it. The interviewer's just like, hey, what have you done? What have you shipped? That's kind of what they care about. So you're that fine line of, okay, well, I know it's my baby, I know it's kind of something I've worked on, and I'm kind of almost parting away from it, but also to have the skill to talk about it from an objective point of view and say, well, this was the product, this is why it worked, this is why it didn't work, here's the reasons why it didn't work, and here's what are some of the things that we did really well. To have that objective lens was probably the hardest thing for me, because I was talking about my product and talking about what we did and talking to my co-founder and all of that process. It's like, you've got to remove yourself. You've got to remove yourself and just look at it from the other perspective. They just want to know, what have you shipped? What was the impact that you had? And what does your process look like? That was what I had the hardest time with. So first couple interviews, just like Hannah, I was having a hard time. And then I got into the swing of things where I'm like, okay, that was just a product I worked on. It doesn't have to be my product. I know I'm attached to it, but let me detach myself from it.
Yeah, I think I already talked about some of my challenges, especially being just a year out of school, where I think resume would not have been interesting to any major company, but again, leveraging both where areas that would value my domain expertise, as well as people who had either been mentors or had some connection where they knew that I had shipped things and had been able to do a lot with very little, and leaning in on that. But I mean, if I were to your answers sound way better than what I gave, where they were like, oh, how do you decide? And I'm like, well, I picked this because I'm the CEO and I'm very good at product. So I didn't literally say that, but I mean, there was not much more substance than that I thought of. But as a CEO, I think I had been a pretty terrible product manager since I had never done the job and didn't have any product mentors. So I think that's a more common pitfall if you're doing it right out of school than if you're doing it after having worked in some kind of other environment. It sounds like y'all did way better than me. So.
Yeah, I think for me, I second a lot of things that Hannah was saying. I think we were actually looking for jobs around the same time. And I think especially with like larger companies, they would ask me questions, standard interview question like, how have you worked with like a difficult stakeholder? And I think like having worked mostly in startups and consulted with startups, typically you just talk to the CEO or like, you were the founder and you just decide to do something. But I did have one experience because my company was acquired by Yahoo and that was a massive corporation. Like even as an engineer, like having to work with other teams. So I had that experience, I just needed to figure out like how to describe it in a way that was like meaningful to someone looking for that in more of a PM context. So I think the book, like Cracking the PM Interview, I think is called, was super helpful just in terms of like how to structure answers. And I feel like a lot of like interview questions for product managers are very similar from company to company, no matter if you go from startup or large company. So I think just figuring out like how to describe your past experiences that you've had in a way that's meaningful to the particular company that you're interviewing for goes a long way. So I think that was like the biggest challenge, was like figuring out how to talk about my experiences.
Totally, I think framing is a big part of it and figuring out what to leave out. Totally echo what Raj was saying. I have one of my tips in my book is leave out the gory details. And so one example I gave in there was I had a story about the conversions and the lifts I increased through my experiments. And the experiments took a whole year. It's just like on the homepage, how do I get more people to sign up? But like in between the first and the second experiment, I like shifted from working full-time somewhere and then working full-time on my startup. So like there was like a huge shift. I quit my job. And then between the second and the third, I had a co-founder breakup, right? Like that is a whole other like very difficult thing to handle, and a lot of emotion goes into that, So, but then like, do I need to tell the interviewers I know? Like, it just like, the first time I did this, it increased by this, and then I did this, and it increased by this. So you just focus on that. You don't even have to tell them like, it took me a whole year, right? It doesn't matter. It's like, as long as you show the result, no matter how long it takes, like you got there. And I think it's particularly hard for a lot of founders because a lot of times you don't have the luxury of running like a single experiment. Like you're doing your experiments and then like you have your major customer bail, like okay, now you got to put out that fire, so like some things could take a little bit longer, and that's okay. Like you can weave stories together from a longer span of time, and like as long as it makes sense and that it's coherent, like I think the stories are there, and you might have to just dig a little deeper to find it. So now, what are strengths you think founders should lean into during the job search process?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the biggest strength as a founder is just like being able to get stuff done, because ultimately, the buck stops with you, and if you don't do it, your company dies essentially. And that's something I feel like, especially startups looking for PMs really value, because I think PMs at startups have a wider range of responsibilities. You're not just doing, you might be doing more than just product, like you might be responsible for hiring someone and whatnot. So I feel like just being a self-starter and like getting shit done is probably like the biggest advantage you could lean on, especially if you're looking to transition to becoming a startup PM somewhere else.
Yeah, I think plus one to all of that, and general scrappiness and willingness to wear multiple hats, can often, again, depends on who you are as a founder, and different founders have different strengths, but, I think usually founders are not doing one role exclusively, and so that tends to be a really good contributing factor towards, why you would be able to get things done, more quickly, more efficiently at a company than, maybe someone who's only ever been in one role. But again, I think some companies value that more than others. It's been great just at Shopify where I think even more so, again, Google, it depended on the team, but in particular in my team at Shopify where it's like, I've touched some of the data stuff, some of the design stuff, some of the user research stuff, and like that is encouraged, for whatever will just help accelerate the projects efficiently.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is you have so much competitive advantage being a founder and applying, because you're so different than the rest of the candidates. a lot of the interview panelists are like, wow, I've always wanted to start my own startup, I just haven't done it yet. And so to get someone that's coming in, it's a fresh breath of air for them completely, right? They want someone that, like you guys mentioned, is scrappy, takes initiative, all of that, but it takes a lot of courage to go out there, quit your job, work on your startup, work on it really hard, and then when it doesn't pan out, it's not a loss, it's still a win. You're still, that whole process, that journey that you've had, most people don't have that experience. So like, it's such a huge competitive advantage that we often don't see it that way. We're just like, oh, I'm just another candidate, but you're not. You really are not. So it comes back to what Hannah was saying, like you have to frame your story. It'll take some time to figure out what that voice for you looks like and what those strengths might be, but it's a huge competitive advantage when people are interviewing you.
One more thing I would add is I think like, especially if you haven't shipped a whole ton of product yet, some of the behavioral questions might start to feel a little tough because like maybe you didn't get to ship like, I don't know, 2-3 different features, or you have enough stories to cover all of the behavioral questions because you're doing also sales, business development, marketing. So one interesting I found that was helpful for me was some companies only do case-based interviews. So Oscar was like that. And I felt like for case-based interviews, you're actually on the same playing field as everyone. So there are definitely companies that focuses on case interviews, and I felt like I was really good at that. Probably it helped that I came from consulting that also had case-based interviews, but that was definitely a bonus for me from my experience. What type of companies or departments have you found to be open to hiring founders?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is definitely like smaller stage startups. I think especially ones where the founders themselves are hiring for maybe like, you know, their first 5 PMs or something. I remember when I was interviewing, like those were the people who were really excited about it because, you know, they know what it's like to be a founder and to be an owner of something, and they wanted someone else who they could like fully trust to get the job done. And so I feel like they were much more excited about founders as PMs as opposed to, you know, even if they interviewed someone who had previously worked at like a big tech as a PM, they would probably be more excited by someone who was a founder. And that's a huge advantage because you know, some companies are not interested in founders as PMs. Some companies are mostly interested in PMs who have prior PM experience. So I think that was definitely like a huge competitive advantage for founders if you can find those early stage startups.
I think one thing I would add to startups is if they're too early, you might not be the best fit either. So if they're hiring for their first PM, they are likely looking for like someone with a lot more product experience that the founders can learn from. So if that's your first PM gig, it might be hard to get that. That happened to me a couple of times when they were hiring for first PMs, and like I didn't end up getting those because they wanted someone with more experience. And at the time, I actually also talked to a Sequoia recruiter, and what she told me was I would be a really great second or third PM hire, because the first they want like head of product or someone with more experience. The second thing I would add is don't discount big companies. Sometimes big companies have like new market role, go-to-market roles, or like new products, and I mean, okay, I think this is part of the reason why I got hired at Oscar. Afterwards, I asked my manager, oh, how come you decided to hire me? And he said, oh, it's because this role is a lot more ambiguous, and we felt like you wouldn't be phased by that. So that my product area wasn't necessarily new market, but it was just like an area that the company haven't had a chance to figure out or like have a vision or a direction for. So don't discount big companies either.
So I mean, when I was applying, I went straight to a tiny startup. I guess I was the second product manager, and I think that was definitely, I would not have been great as the very first one since I was employee 13, I think. But I think many companies out there do like founders. This is not at all a full list, but you know, Google for sure, Shopify for sure. I've also gotten like outreach from companies specifically trying to hire someone with a startup background where like the company in general may not want that for PM, but like some areas where like Indeed, I think, has certain things they really want to hire, ex-founders for. I think Stripe also had, specific subparts. I have another founder friend who went to Uber, had a good experience there. So I think many companies often, and even that changes, every few months, who has started new roles, those types of positions are always opening up.
Yeah, I think for me, like before I started my company, I was already working in a small ed tech startup. There was about 15 of us, and I did that for about 3 years. So having gone from already an early stage seed, Series A, I left right before we raised the B, then going on to start my own thing. When I was looking for my next job, I was actually very intentional with, okay, I actually want something big tech. I want to know what that proper PM experience looks like. What the heck is a PRD? Everyone talks about it. We don't write it in the startup world. I actually want to know what that process feels like. So for me, having been the teacher and worked in early stage and as a founder, I actually wanted something big tech. And that was my goal and my objective, to see what that life and that world looks like, just to give me a more holistic experience. So I think it would come back to you guys. Maybe you want to go to a slightly bigger startup, Series B, Series C, that's okay. And those that want to try big tech, like Hannah was saying, don't knock on it. It's actually a great experience where you just learn and see what that process looks like.
Cool. So now we're going to move into the second part, which is being on the job, like your learnings, like surprises and whatnot. So my first question is, when you started your first PM gig, what surprised you about this role? I can go first on this one. I was very surprised by how big companies, so Oscar was probably a 1,500 when I joined, and the PM team was like 30, 35, 40. I was very surprised by how big companies do user research. I was so used to like, oh, we have a question, okay, let's go talk to them tomorrow. I remember the first time I was given the task, I knew, okay, let's do some user research, and then I remember my manager saying, okay, you gotta go talk to marketing because they own the emails. They're gonna send the emails to do the outreach. You cannot send it yourself because there's like unsubscribe, subscribe, like data that's already in the company's data system. And then I need to write like a research questionnaire, like get approvals for incentives. And the whole process took like 5-6 weeks, which I was very surprised by because I was just so used to talking to someone the next day, So that was one thing.
Yeah, I think for me it was just resources. As founders, you don't have any resources. You're the research person, you're the data person, you're the one that's like doing everything. And then to just be like, oh yeah, the research team will give you, in 2 weeks, like what we think about this feature. And then the data team will tell you which feature, how the feature performed. It's like, wow, I just have to be very clear with my ask. I have to be very clear with like what I need to buy. And like there are dedicated teams set for this. Like I was so shocked by that. I don't know if you guys felt that way. I mean, that's my answer. That's the resources.
Yeah, I think my first PM experience when I joined 13-person startup was, nothing like Google. So I think, there I was also running user research, which was a great learning experience. But, I think joining Google was probably more where I had a similar experience of like, oh, we're going to launch a product. I've done that before. Great. Oh, marketing is going to now like call up all their like, the outlets and buy ads, and the PR knows everybody in the press, and now I get press training, and now they like show up to ask questions, which was very different and pretty fun. But I think I also was surprised at how both like at the startup, but then also even at Google and now continually at Shopify, like I still did need to tap into a lot of those other skills. Like often you're given only 20% of one of the data people's time, and so if you want the answer now, it might be faster to go look yourself versus wait 3 days until either they're done with another project or back in the office. And with like user research, for example, we had the dedicated user research, which was great, but sometimes they might not be available for a session for another month. And so if you wanted to, get some information to inform your product requirements document, PRD, for example, running an informal study, that very afternoon with whoever is around in the office might in fact get you like a lot more data quickly. And then, you still do the study with them, but you have better questions because you kind of narrowed down some of the obvious things by yourself first. So I think that still happens to be like part of my role, and maybe I just gravitate towards roles where there's a little bit more fluidity. But it is great to have, I'd say, people who are usually better at it than you to at least check your work and give you guidance if they're not available to full on do the task themselves.
I think for me, it was just how structured the whole product development process was. I'd never been part of that structured of a process, so I feel like it was just a lot of terms, pointing, sprints, PRDs, like writing documents and specs. I had never really been in an environment where I had to do sort of the more formal parts of a product development process. So that was like, I think a massive, maybe not surprise, but like a learning experience for like the first month or so, having never done any like formal product before that.
What have you guys found were your strengths when you first started as a new team? Okay, I guess I can go first. I noticed my strengths were one, being a big advocate for users. I think because I come from my startup background, I'm so used to building something because I intimately, I really feel the user. And I was one of my own users, so it's just okay, I know they really like this. But I think maybe potentially the bigger company you go, sometimes maybe it's not as intimate because you don't talk to your user every day. They're not your friends. You haven't built that relationship with them. It's oh, I have to study. You have an incentive, so it's you talk to them. So I think advocating for users and research was one of my strengths I noticed. And then the other one is understanding how to build MVPs in a very lightweight way. So there's do things that don't scale when you are building your business. So I would always have these ideas of what if we just do email, pen and paper, versus let's build this button, So I found myself to be the person in the room, thinking of these more scrappy ideas.
I don't know that any of my strengths were things related to the startup world. I mean, maybe it was the same things where I really liked, pitching and presenting, and I think, being able to tell a story of why this feature is worth further investment was probably a shared type of skill. But I mean, I think, I also discovered a lot of new things where I don't even necessarily feel comfortable calling them strengths. I mean, ask my colleagues if they think I was actually good at it, but I'd say, definitely trying to find the, whatever the MVP is to kind of validate the idea before we make a big investment. Trying to actually talk to users, trying to better distinguish where is something an opinion versus where is it, evidence-based, or at least with some evidence versus where is it just a hypothesis, and kind of getting the team aligned with hang on, we think this is the case, how can we actually know for sure? But I don't think I did much of that as a startup founder. Those are definitely areas that could have done a lot better, but I think got much more pressure to learn to do well in a bigger company environment.
Yeah, I think strength-wise, it was just ask a lot of questions. You'd be surprised. People just kind of stick with the status quo. It's oh, this is kind of how we build it. It'll take us 6 weeks to ship this feature. It'll take us 3 quarters to do this. And it's do we really have to do it that way? And when you start asking questions over and over again, you realize not everyone's doing that. And that is kind of your role as a PM to be questioning the process. I think that's something that was happening that I didn't know was a strength. Like we were saying, other people were pointing it out. The other thing was just moving fast. Especially in big org, you're just, research takes time. And you will do an early review of how long it'll take them, and you want to move fast. And so a lot of these teams are not used to moving at a faster pace. So I think asking a lot of questions, questioning the status quo, and then pushing the pace for hey, let's get this done quicker. Let's ship it quicker. Because as a founder, you're if you want to ship something tomorrow, you can, right? That's how fast something can move for you. But then it slows down a lot more when you have a lot more stakeholders in the room. So If you're someone that's pushing the pace, people do appreciate that.
Do you have an example of how you push the pace?
Yeah, there's one right now. We are building a feature right now that will probably come out next year for back to school. And we have a proper research that's happening. And one of the things that we have to do is we have to have reviews where the director and the director's director will like give you a green light. They want to like make sure this is gonna, like it looks good. The research has to be a proper, fully fledged research that's gonna go through. They're gonna talk to a bunch of teachers, students, admins. It can take a couple of weeks, maybe even like a couple months. And I don't want to just sit around and not work on this until that's done. So I'm just reaching out to teachers myself. My other PM that's working with me on this, we're like, hey, what can we do? Who are some other people we can reach out to? We have a conversation happening Monday now with about 40 teachers. I'm flying to LA next Friday, speaking with teachers. And so you don't have to just rely on, oh, this is the process. The research team will get back to you in 3 weeks or 3 months. You can take it upon yourself and just move really fast. So I would say that's the one that I'm currently working on right now.
Cool.
I think you almost covered it.
I'll echo what Raj was saying. So this one time related to research, also it takes a long time. So I just walked around New York City and I walked into doctor's offices and asked some questions. Luckily, my designer was game for it, so he came with me, even though it's like not what he does usually. But I did that, and I got what I needed so much faster. They were very confused. I was like, "Why are you here?" So next question: what skills would you recommend newer PMs to try to pick up their first year or second year on the job? Or like courses or like things to read? And I'm going to start here. I think for me, that something that was so valuable for me and that I forced myself to learn when I was at Oscar was SQL. I think, and now that I'm a product consultant, it helped me speed up the process for getting the data I need to make certain decisions. So I really took the time and spent nights and weekends learning SQL, and it not only accelerated my work at Oscar, I don't have to rely on data science to get back to me. And I think in smaller startup setting, you just have more capacity to get the things that you need instead of waiting on people for. So, do you guys have anything else?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I feel like it really depends on, the company you're at, the role you're at. Are you trying to build skills to get you to somewhere else, or do you want to just, advance within your current team or company? I can definitely, I don't think I deliberately build up any particular skills, but I can say maybe the skills that I'm happiest that I did develop. But again, I think I want to caveat that, these skills are useful to me because of the types of products I've been working on, which are, pretty consumer and have pretty wide user bases. And so, you have, for example, the data thing. I would echo for sure being able to get the data, however it's stored at your company. SQL is a pretty good foundation. There's usually going to be something related to it. I think at Google we had our own, I think or even 2 different versions of it. If you know SQL, you can figure out the other one. So I think, being able to get data, that was really important. I'll also say though, I have plenty of PM friends who almost never look at data because of the way their products launch. One friend who works on an operating system, they don't run experiments. They sort of want to see who's using things, but that's a very different type of data problem than, how do we successfully design a test to evaluate this change. So I guess the other 2 I would say that I'm really glad I did learn from. And I think the main way that I recommend learning is at your company, look who's really good at it, and then just spend time with them, talk to them, get feedback from them. Just because, courses, awesome starting point, but I'd say learning about experiment design, A/B test design, as well as survey design. Those are things where, a course would be one thing, and that could be a great starting point, but it wasn't until I actually talked to people who had years of experience doing this. I tried designing experiments, tried writing surveys, got the feedback, tried running the surveys, and I think it wasn't until I had the chance to actually do that I got to the point where now I'm comfortable, I even sometimes will correct user researchers who maybe don't have a background in survey design, but I think find the experts in your company at things that are interesting to you, learn as much as you can from them, But focus on the product areas that you're interested in. And I think for me, experiments, survey design, also the data side, were things that I'm really glad I have those skills now.
Yeah, I'd say 2 skills, and I'm working on them myself right now. First one's organization. I've always been scrappy and doing things last minute, and as a PM, that can get you in a lot of trouble, especially because people rely on you. A lot of different teams rely on you. So if you don't have a system, like, you're going to be in trouble. And so email systems, how are you taking notes, how are you sharing notes back out with people, it's something that I really struggled with, and it's a skill that you need to develop. So I would say if you already have organization down, great, that's good for you. But if you are like me, that's something that I'm constantly working on. The second thing I'll say is you'd be surprised how people use products. Like you think about like Spotify or Netflix. Not everyone uses it the way you use it. Not everyone uses it the way your friends use it. I remember asking my hiring manager at the time, what's the biggest challenge that, I was like, you have to come up with questions. I was like, oh, what's the biggest challenge that, you had as a PM? And he was like, I have to think about a teacher that's 60 years old in Indonesia using Google for Classroom for 3 students. And that has to be the same experience or a parallel experience with someone that in New York City is a teacher that's your age and that's teaching a class of 30 people. I'm familiar with the New York City 30 people high school math teacher because I've done something like that. But I'm so not used to the other side of things. So just always be questioning how are people using this product, because it's not the way that you naturally assume it to be. So organization, and then how else can someone use this product? So think about that.
I think, 2 things for me, sort of like what Julie was saying. I think it really depends on the role and the company you end up in as a PM and what your learnings are. So for me, I was a platform PM. So a lot of my goal was to get other teams within the company to use my product and like work closely with them. So I think for me, like what I learned the most was like just negotiating with other teams and sort of like working with like other groups of people who don't necessarily report to you or like have a shared report. So I think that was really valuable, especially coming from like the startup world. I think the second thing for me was, in terms of like the best resource, I think it was just working closely with other PMs, which I got an opportunity to do as a platform PM as well. I think I learned a ton from just PMs who've been doing this for 5 years. And I think more than any course or book, I feel like that was just like really valuable, having them like look at my PRDs and like come to my meetings and give me feedback after. So yeah, that was really helpful.
Okay, I know I said it depends like what you're doing and where you want to go, but I think one skill that I didn't mention because I forgot that I had to learn it like years ago, but I actually meet a lot of PMs who don't, is basic like creation of mocks. Figma is usually the most common tool that's used, but this is one I also recommend to like, my sister, for example, she's in sales, but it's actually really useful if you just want to explain a concept of, could we make this change, to be able to make a really rough concept, especially if you're working remotely and you can't, point at the screen together or whiteboard something. Just, learn very basic Figma screenshot manipulation. Unless you're like purely on like a ranking, or actually no, I do ranking work and I still mock that up because sometimes people just need to see it. But I find being able to communicate visually and just being comfortable doing something very rough, very quickly, can make discussions happen so much more quickly. You're not going to use your mocks, but just again, have productive conversations. Learn, Figma, Sketch, whatever your company uses. Basic skills there, invaluable.
That's a really good one. Cool, so we're gonna have probably 2 more questions and then we're gonna go into the Q&A. So if you have questions, I guess on Zoom you can start dropping it in. So we'll take questions from both Zoom and here. So I'm really curious, now that you've been a PM, a founder, and probably a bunch of other things, where do you see your career going?
I think for me is wanting to be a founder again. I think, I just really enjoy consulting with startups, both in sort of like a product and engineering role. And I think, being a founder is awesome because you get to, do a lot of different things. And I feel like, I get bored if I'm only focusing on one thing. So that's kind of what, and I think being a product manager at a larger company has helped that quite a bit as well, because I think the first time I was a founder, I didn't know anything about product development processes or anything, but working at a more structured place, like you can pick and choose the things that work for you, and skip the things that are too much process and you don't need at a small startup. So it's been really valuable, but I think like founding a startup is awesome. So that's hopefully where I'm going to go next.
And for me, I could see myself at like the nexus of founder and PM role. I think like I really enjoy building companies and being on a smaller team, but I can see myself like realize, okay, I feel like there's this part of product or this thing that I feel like I need to get better at. And so I could see myself like going into certain roles to want to get better at a certain area, and do that for a few years, and then like old companies again, it's like back and forth. So I can see myself like jumping between the two actually quite often.
Can you share what would be an area where you want to learn more?
Let me think about it. Maybe when you guys, after you finish, I'll think about it.
So having been a founder, I guess also I'm in a different life stage now where, have a mortgage and baby, which awesome stuff, but I'm not looking to be a founder anytime probably in the next 5 or so years, but I do really enjoy a lot of the challenges of bigger companies. So I think, I think I'd enjoy staying at a larger company, and I think one of the challenges I've enjoyed, especially more recently as I've gotten more senior in my roles, is basically trying to figure out other people's strengths and how to make sure that oh, this person has all this knowledge here, let's make sure that this other team has it, and basically just unlocking efficiencies of teams. So I think there's going to be plenty to keep me busy for the next, 5+ years, who knows, at larger companies. I mean, I could see myself, staying in companies like Shopify. I also could consider running product at a early or mid-sized company and kind of building out that work. But I think being the very first employee, there's so many other things that come with it. You mentioned like hiring, all of that, and I think not in as much of a hurry to do kind of some of those other things, as opposed to either join a mid-sized type of place and try and unlock the full potential, or grow out and kind of scale an earlier org into kind of the best manifestation of it.
Yeah, I think when I think about my career, I obviously want to, kind of like you, go back to finding a company. But I think for the next 5 years, I'm set where I'm at right now. I think I'm learning a lot. 2 things I want to speak about. I think when I started my company, it was very naive and like, oh, I want to go build this edtech product and let's just jump into it and start working on it, which is great. But I did so many things wrong, like hiring, not having a good co-founder. So the next 5 years, I want to work on those skills, like finding a network of people that I see myself building with, right? Because it's not a short, quick thing. It's at least 10-year thing that you're looking at, maybe 5. And so when I do it again the second time around, I want to make sure I'm not repeating those same mistakes. Hiring is one of them, having a good network, a good co-founder, someone that's technical that can build some of the things that we want to ship out. The second thing is scale. I think you asked a question earlier, like what was something that surprised you when you transitioned to PM? I think scale, working at Microsoft and at Google for Education, both these education products, I'm dealing with exactly who I would want to be. Like if 10 years from now I have the best output, right? What would that be? That would be I built an edtech startup that millions of teachers around the world are using, and students are dependent on this project and growing from it. Well, I have that right now. I'm working with Google for Education. We're doing that. So at scale, there's no way I could get that experience. So the only way to get that is right now. Like, okay, well, if we made an error, how does that impact like 5 million users, in a certain part? So those challenges as a founder, you will never get that, right? I mean, as a founder, it's more so product market fit. Okay, we're seeing a spike with this certain feature. Maybe we double down on this one. So I think those are the 2 areas where for the next 5 years, grow my network, and then really with scale, what are the challenges that are coming with it, and learn from that. But then eventually, 5%.
I think to answer your question, Julia, actually,
Raj, I can help you think through it better. I think it's when I want to learn how to operate at scale and build products at scale. I think that's like a fascinating challenge in itself. So like, whenever that itch comes, I can see myself being PM again, I wanted to be in that role. So, as we know, the founder to PM, there are also PMs interested in becoming founders. For those PMs out there interested in becoming founders, what would you say to them? I think you should reach out to me because startup advising is really fun and you should share your pitch deck. Again, no interest in being a founder myself, but I made so many mistakes and learned so many things, and it's been awesome over the years to be able to pass back some of those learnings. I'd say, it kind of depends on you, your team, the opportunity. So I don't think there's any good universal advice like, do it. Maybe, but there's also ways to do it smartly, and you can check a lot of things in advance before you quit your job or, go after something. So I think there's lots of people like me who love to, talk to early stage people and kind of make sure that you're asking all the right questions to vet things. And I think, in particular, one thing that I've really enjoyed mentoring on is basically how to pitch your idea. So, again, I do this on the side. It's no intention of charging at all, so solely because it's fun to stay connected to the startup world. But I think, again, a lot of people really like talking to startups. So, go find mentors, get early feedback. They'll help you make sure you're asking the right questions. But I think, again, if I were to do a startup again, and I've met with lots of potential co-founders over the years and ultimately never found a match because now I have, I think, a pretty good list of questions to ask. And I think all of the sort of early concerns I had in all of those cases, manifested pretty quickly because, once you've done it and kind of seen some of the guts, there's a lot of, again, common mistakes, and I think, again, just common ways to kind of check things. So, find people who like doing this. There's a lot of them. I'm new to New York City, but in the Boston world, there were so many, again, other entrepreneurs, VCs who they want to meet all of the young entrepreneurs because they don't want to miss out on the next big thing. So I think, again, you might be surprised how many people are happy just to give you early feedback on your idea. Do that.
I think if a PM is trying to go to a founder role and you traditionally work at a bigger company, it's just inverse thinking now, right? You now have to actually, instead of thinking at scale, you have to find your first 10 users, first 100 users, and are they coming back? How often are they coming back? So it's just a completely different framework, I would say. You just have to run a lot of tests. You have to know what you're building out, know who your end user is, what you're trying to do. But I would say the number one thing would be make sure you have an inkling with what that product market fit looks like, because you're not going to get those research resources. You're not going to get those data analysts helping you out. It's going to be you, maybe a couple of people that you're working with. So try to validate your idea as much as you can right now, while you have your job, while you're in the position that you're in. Once you found this niche spot where you're hey, I think there's something here, and clearly I'm seeing it over and over again, not just in my head, but people are talking to me, they're telling me about it. People are willing to pay me for this if something existed. Make sure you have that product market fit and be adamant that it's there. Once that's there, then it's just scrapping this and moving fast. So that would be my suggestion. It's not scale anymore, it's a lot faster. And you're not thinking in quarters and H1, H2, you're thinking next week, tomorrow. So it's just really reverse.
Cool. And then for me, I would say you definitely have the product training for some of these things, so that's definitely a strength that you'll bring in, or how to think about products in ways that I think I just built a company because it was a problem I had, and I didn't have all of that training before doing it, so that's definitely a bonus that you come with. And then I think definitely agree with Raj on unless you want to raise on an idea and figure out as you go. If you're not planning on doing that, it's really helpful to have some validation or
early validation while you have your job, because once you leave, like the clock is ticking, and you might get more stressed out, and it affects your ability to be creative, you know, when you're like financially stressed. So I think making like good timing for it. And then another one is the uncertainty that comes with it could be a little jarring, something to be aware of. Yeah, but definitely encourage PMs out there to explore this path as well. It'd be a lot of fun.
Also, because when I went through Techstars, we got introduced to so many mentors. I'd say only listen to advice and maybe generally only seek out advice, but sometimes you get unsolicited advice from people who have experience in your particular sector. Because like, you know, we met with so many awesome people, like, you know, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies who I guess had like recently retired and wanted to help out the startups, and that, you know, we were doing like health tech and we were trying to figure out if we were like consumer enterprise. We started consumer, and like, you know, CEOs of enterprise companies were like, oh my gosh, no, this is like the answer. They did not have consumer backgrounds. They were like incredible in their field, but they were not the right people to advise. And so, you know, whenever I have friends or, you know, people in my network who ask like me advice on something like ed tech, I would be like, no, I'm the wrong, you know, here's someone who does know ed tech, go talk to them. So I think, you know, most people, hopefully, they'll be like, I don't have the expertise here, so here's someone who might, or like, here's where you can find someone who will. But, you know, again, people who've either been in that domain or like, again, consumer versus enterprise, these types of things. So I mean, also even just thinking about like, say, someone who maybe has domain expertise but only ever did that at Google, they were starting off with, you know, way more resources, way more kinds of advantages. And so again, they're gonna have some perspectives, but like the idea of launching something there with that machine behind them versus, you know, you starting from nothing, just keep that in mind when hearing about different people's experiences.
Cool, I think that is the end of our questions. So we will take questions from here and also on Zoom. Does anyone have questions? We'll alternate. Anyone have questions here?
Should I do this or?
I think you say it now, repeat the question.
So first, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. It was very interesting and inspiring as well. For me, I just joined a company 2 weeks ago for my first job as an APM. And your last question was actually very interesting because I'm planning maybe to become a founder later. So just one more question about that. What kind of personal competence strengths do you think I should develop? Maybe from a managerial point of view, because I guess it's different to manage a team when you're a PM and when you're a founder. So that's what
I think the first few years of being a founder, you're not really managing people because it's usually going to be like you and like a co-founder or like an early intern or employee.
Depends how fast the company grows.
Depends on, yeah, that's true, that's a good caveat. So from my experience, I personally wouldn't worry about thinking about how to manage when you dip into your founder. I would think more about like, how do I like launch products quickly? How do I find a person I can work with and like just get into like a really good groove with like a small team to push products quickly. I at least in my startup, I didn't find myself having to flex management muscle.
Yeah, I think I second that where, you know, I think the main thing is just figuring out what your strengths are. I think it's probably a fallacy to assume that you have to learn to do everything. Again, like, yes, I can do a little bit of coding, I can do some data, I'm more strong probably at user research, but like, so like if I were to sort of think about how to fill the gaps, it'd be like, okay, probably first hire would be someone like on the engineering side though, or the sales side, because that's where I'm weakest. Like, it wouldn't be a good use of my time to necessarily try and develop all the engineering skills because it's just unrealistic to think that I'm gonna be super great in all of those. Like, focus on the ones you enjoy and then try to just, you know, meet people, build a network, and make sure that your co-founders are gonna be complementing your skills. And I think, you know, in terms of the management side, I think, you know, most companies, again, depends on the company, but companies that have even a formal APM program, that they tend to be bigger. And so, unless, you know, magical things happen and suddenly you're managing people quite quickly. It's probably going to be a little while until that happens. Just directly managing is usually not part of individual contributor PM roles, and that's totally fine. That's usually, do a few years of that, eventually move into the management role. And I think just focusing again on, learning as much as you can and things you do enjoy that are going to be related to whatever domain you're interested in. So if it's going to be, again, consumer tech, enterprise tech, again, those are two very high-level categories. There's many subcategories there. And again, meeting as many people as you can to figure out, how you're going to fill those gaps. But I would say in terms of the management, usually you won't be at the beginning, but as soon as you start to, I just try and find yourself a mentor or two who does have management experience, because, for my own managers, I think, some of them had many years of experience, some of them were brand new. Years of experience, unfortunately, did not always correlate to, manager ability. Some of the great ones were brand new, some of the not so great ones, years of experience. So I think, assume you can figure it out if you like people and you care, but it might be good to just have a couple people who you can kind of bounce things off of to make sure that as these unknown situations come up, you'll figure out how to handle them.
I'll just add one thing. I think this might not answer your question directly, but I think managing your own expectations going into it is very important, because like they said earlier, you won't really be managing people for a while. What you do have to get really comfortable with if you're going to become a founder is being lonely and doing it by yourself day after day after day, and you don't have happy hour with your coworkers that you might be used to right now. You don't just get together with a bunch of people whenever you want to. You kind of sign off of that, right? You're now subscribed to your own lane, and a lot of it initially will be just you. So that's something that people don't really talk about. When I was going into it, I was like, oh, it should be fun. I'll be networking, I'll be meeting people. And to your point, you get so many people thrown your way, you have to pick and choose, and it's I don't need that right now. I need to kind of focus on myself. But just be ready for that. There'll be a lot of moments where it's just you questioning yourself, is this the right decision? Should the product be going this way? Is this the right co-founder? And so a lot of it is conversations you're having with yourself, especially in your early days.
I was going to say something, but now I forgot. Actually, yes, to the loneliness, very much can be the case. I think, I don't know what this was again when I went through Techstars, that was 10 years ago, but going through an accelerator was, again, generally very, very much I would be pro, and I think we had the fellow CEOs, we did something we'd call entrepreneurisrate, where we'd go and get dinner and just CEOs only kind of talk about how hard it is to be a CEO and kind of what we were dealing with. So I'd say if you can find other, I don't know if you would be CEO, but just other people in the same type of co-founding position who are not in your company, so you can be whether you're the CEO, being oh my gosh, my CTO is driving me nuts, or the CEO is driving me nuts. Having kind of peers in that, they do exist. Accelerator programs can be great just because now you have a cohort of other people like that. And so for that reason alone, it can be great to be in one. I don't know, again, which ones are good to be in, what the value add is these days, but solely just for the fact that you're going through these things with other people, I would recommend looking at accelerators. And I think getting into an accelerator is often a good sign just of someone thinks this is worth doing even if you're not ready for venture funding. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it if you don't, but I think, again, this is where figuring out what are the risks you're taking on. There's a lot of kind of signals that you can use to kind of de-risk and make sure that you're more likely to have a good outcome since the odds are already stacked against you.
Yeah, I think one thing that's, as a PM, I think one of the advantages at a larger company is you get to meet a lot of different job functions, and I think that would have been really valuable for me. Becoming a founder right after college, I would have had no idea how to hire a salesperson, and I was working on enterprise products. So I think one of the big advantages of being a PM early on in your career is you get to interact with sales and marketing, and you can kind of get a better sense of what it means to be a good salesperson, or understand a little bit more about sales and design. And I think that's where, as a founder, you end up wearing a lot of different hats and having to hire a lot of different job functions. So I think that can be really valuable as a PM, is to absorb things outside your necessarily the main focus of your job, and just talk to people in different parts of the organization, because one day you might have to build a similar kind of organization.
Is there a question from Zoom?
Yes. Question from Cat Hill. I love marketing sales as a founder. Which product marketing or growth roles would be a good fit? Are there any specific skills I should brush up on before interviews?
I love what?
I love marketing sales as a founder.
Okay, so which role would be good?
Which product marketing or growth roles would be a good fit? That's the question.
I mean, I can say, I think, product marketing manager, if you do some of the product-y questions, can be a good one. I think if it is sales, straight up sales can be fun. If you have any kind of technical inclinations, then things like sales engineer get to combine those two things in a way that, again, it's a really rare skill set to find. And, for the right person, it can be awesome because you still get to talk to all the people, but also get to touch the code. So I think it depends on, your background, your skill set. But I think, in terms of the process to get a sales job, I don't know that any of us have applied for sales jobs, so probably Google might be a better advisor on how to get those types of jobs.
I think a lot of startups and larger companies have growth product manager roles, and I think those are probably good fits, especially if you love doing marketing, less so the sales aspect of it, but the marketing aspect of it. You probably end up working with a marketer as part of that role, but you do get to see the more holistic product development process and run experiments and see what works and what doesn't. So it's a good mix of product and marketing. So I feel those roles might be a good fit.
I'll add one more. So I personally have not done this role, but I've talked to a lot of people who have, within even certain companies, for example with Google, the roles in cloud, they are not salesy, they're not on a quota, but you talk a lot to customers and you think a lot about customer needs. So I think, again, if you like talking to customers, there are PME roles which you might call more salesy, but again, I'm hesitant to almost use that term because, you're not on a quota, you're just working much more closely with sales than you would be, say, on a consumer product where there is no sales.
Any questions from the,
Yeah, great talk. How do you, as a PM, how do you effectively communicate with your stakeholders? You may communicate with your stakeholders, your engineers. What is the best way to communicate in that aspect?
So I'll repeat the question on the mic. As a PM, how do you effectively communicate with stakeholders?
Yeah.
I think it depends on the stakeholders and your role. I think I'm very cautious about generalizations for these types of things because I think, again, it's all about expectations and what the company processes are. I think what I learned is, some engineers, they have lots of opinions and, they really want to be a part of the early ideation, and so make sure to include them. They probably have, often great ideas. And if there are partners where what you're doing might directly affect them, again, I think earlier conversations can be better, but it very much depends on the person. Sometimes, I in fact wouldn't have an early conversation because it might, freak them out, and so I'm going to wait until I have a little more evidence and, maybe anticipate what the concerns might be, and so wait to come to them until I have I know these were your concerns, but I've done this extra research, and turns out, I don't know that that's actually going to be as much of an issue. Let me know what you think. So I think, again, depends on the people, depends on, the processes, and depends on the personalities as well. So make good judgment calls and just try and anticipate how people will react to make sure no one feels left out.
Yeah, I think the no one feels left out. It's definitely you'd be surprised how many people want to be included and they're not. And so as a PM, you have to make sure, hey, is marketing looped into this? And it's your responsibility to do so. But as far as how do you effectively do it, the only piece of advice I have is set people up for success. And what that means is for the data scientists, make sure they know exactly what they're looking for, because they're going to spend hours hunting the information that you ask them to get. So make sure your asks are clear, the deliverables are clear. But yeah, I like to just set whichever team I'm communicating with, let them know what the goal is, and then I set them up for success. Like, this is what I'm looking for clearly. Let me know if you have any questions. But yeah, okay, set them up for success, be very clear with your ask, and oftentimes you have to just follow up, like, hey, where are we with this? And because you're not really their managers, you have to kind of influence, so just, it's a long game. You have to make sure, because you'll be working with them again, right? You're not just asking for information once, you're gonna go back to that same team again. So while you're building relationships, manage that, okay, I need some information, but I also need to be building a relationship with my engineering team or my data scientist team.
I think one thing I would add is observing how they like to communicate and like match their style. That's like some people like async, some people really like to be in person, you know, so like matching their style helps a lot.
Yeah, I guess one more practical tip I would add is I think going from like working on your own startup, like a lot of the communication, you know, is just verbal or like you're in the same room and, you know, there's just a lot of like shared context. But I think moving to a bigger company, I would recommend writing down and like taking, you know, meeting notes and stuff like that. You want to have more stuff written down just because I think in a larger organization, you know, things can fall through the cracks and yeah, I think having more of a written communication style really helps in like a larger organization or when you're the PM.
James, another question?
Yeah, so a question from James Adler. Every PM job I've seen on LinkedIn almost instantly has 200 applicants. What is a better way to look for PM roles with less competition, as it is very hard to stand out in that many people? Apologies if this question has already been asked.
Yeah, I guess one tip I have is you should, you know, probably reach out to the company through multiple channels. And I think, you know, yeah, just hustle more. As a founder, you do it. So I would like cold email the hiring manager, or, you know, obviously I think with Google it isn't going to work to cold email anyone in particular. But if you're applying for a job that's at a startup, you could probably find the CEO or the product manager who's hiring and email them, apply through multiple channels. I think that, you know, shows more hustle and getting noticed.
I'll say yes, that, you know, in some of my product groups I've heard a lot about just, again, all of the competition. I think, you know, unless you have like a resume that is, you know, traditionally going to stand out, which I think, again, most people actually don't. People come from all sorts of backgrounds. You know, anything you can do to leverage your network, in addition to what you mentioned about just straight up reaching out, is going to be good. I think, like, again, making connections, and often, I mean, it's a little bit better now than say 2 years ago. So I'd say, you know, making connections in person, events like these types of things, can again just, if there's 200 applicants, but you met this person and oh my gosh, they like had such interesting thoughts on this, you might remember them. So I think however you can make connections, even though again, it's a little more difficult in the world of often remote, but anything in person can still help there. I will say, as someone who often gets lots of like outreach things, I wouldn't necessarily discourage the reaching out, but I have a pet peeve, which is I often get pings where people are like, hello, like I would like to hear about your work. Like, let me know when you can speak. I appreciate the reactions, the facial expressions here, where it's like, okay, listen, man, like, you know, I have a full-time job, I have a baby, all of these things. Like, if you want a referral to the company, just tell me. Like, and then, you know, I can say yes or no. Or if you have a really specific, usually I respond and say like, hi, I'm sorry, I don't have time to chat right now, but if you have a specific question, like maybe I can answer it via message. But like, you know, if you want a referral, like, great, have a referral, but I think, you know, especially as soon hiring managers or these people, like, just want to, like, stop what they're doing and meet with you. I mean, again, I get that you're theoretically not supposed to ask things, you're supposed to make an impression, then maybe it'll come up. But like, you know, for me personally at least, and I don't know how other people feel, like, you know, again, I am very busy, just straight up tell me what you want, and, you know, we can go from there.
Yeah, the straight up tell me what you want part is key there, because you'd be surprised. Writing a good cold email is a skill, and people are very, very busy. So like, get that story down pat. And if you see these applications climbing over 200 on LinkedIn already, it's because people are just blindly applying. And so, can you get the job that way? I'm sure you can. But I would almost argue that before you even apply, you should do as much homework as you can. Who is the hiring manager, if you can find out? Can you get a referral? And once you've identified this person, get that cold email down pat, very quick, to the point. Do you need a referral? Because if you tell me that and that's your clear ask, great, I can do that. But a 15-minute coffee chat might be a little too much. And always add value, hey, I've done this, I've talked to users before, or I built a product, these were some of the problems that I had. People who are reading that on the other side will appreciate that. But as clear as you can be in your ask, great. The job that I got at Microsoft, actually, I sent a cold email to someone that was working at Flipgrid saying, hey, I love the product, here's what I think are some of the issues with it. Please let me know if you have some time to chat. That person was like, hey, great, thank you so much. Let's talk about how we can improve the product. So try to add value, try to identify these people, and then in that cold email, figure that out, because you'll be sending a lot of those. Get your story down pat and get your ask very, very clear.
Wow, that's awesome that you did that. I actually have done something sort of similar myself a couple of times. I think in that was a way better way to start the conversation. I don't think anyone's ever done that to me. So I would love to see more of that. Again, I think especially outside of tech where they're hang on, you just reach out to someone and criticize their product. And I think at least in the tech product world, again, it depends what you're saying, but that actually shows that oh, can you show me something I haven't seen? Or are you seeing something that in fact it took me a year to see? Maybe, you have something to add. Again, I'd say try not to spend too much time pre-researching unless you're this is the place for me, because for example, if someone were to reach out to me about my product at Shopify, I'd be oh cool, well, it's not hiring right now. But again, I think, be strategic and it's all about kind of balance, but that is actually awesome when I think, people do reach out, and I have never seen it done. I have seen it again when I did say I worked at Google Maps. I got a lot of people regularly saying, hi, this location is wrong, please fix it. And I was I don't work on that. And they're yeah, but it's wrong, so you need to fix it. I was LinkedIn, this is harassment. No, it's not. Thank you, LinkedIn.
All right, I think we're coming up at the end of our Q&A. We're running out of time. So I just want to close today. So thank you guys, the speakers, for coming today and sharing your experiences and insights with us on this topic. And so I want to give you more details about how to get the Founder to PM book. So today in person we're selling hard copies of paperback, not hardcover. They're going to be $15 per book. This is the only time when I'll be selling print copy, so if you're interested in one, please get one. Otherwise, after today, it'll be ebook only. And then today until Sunday, for all of you online or for people here who want to get the ebook, you can get the ebook for $7.99, and after Sunday, the price is going to go up. So if you want it, get it in the next 3 days. There are QR codes all around for people here where you could scan and get the links. For those online, Eugene is dropping the links into the chat. And all of you tomorrow morning will get a post-event email with links to the books as well. They're going to be on Amazon if you want to get the Kindle, and Gumroad if you want to get the PDF or the EPUB files. And if there's any friends or families you think will be interested in this, forward them this link. This is the pre-release link. Forward to them, share with them. Next Wednesday is the official launch, so you guys get early access to this. So share with as many people you know so that they can get a discount as well. Any questions on this? Okay, and then when this wraps up, I will be at the table over there to do signing, so if you want to get a signed book, come say hi. And then Eugene will be on the book purchase table, which is the one all the way straight back, and he'll do the checkout and whatnot. And lastly, I want to say a couple of thank yous because this wouldn't have been possible without so many of you. So first, I want to thank all the speakers for taking the time out of their busy days to share these valuable insights. Really, really appreciate it. Second, I want to thank my editor, Eugene, who is also on Monday. to write, even when my writing throughout this writing process took like 2 years. So he even got me a writing software called Scrivener, which made the writing process even easier. So this wouldn't happen here without all of his encouragement. Thank you. And for event logistics, so from the food to photography to getting the Zoom set up, I want to thank my brother and Eugene for helping me set up. I wouldn't have been able to do it by myself, so thank you. I think we kind of look alike, so you can probably tell. And then I want to thank my good friend Deanna, who drew the cover and the cartoons for the book. So if you love her artwork, she's here today, go talk to her. The book came alive because of her illustrations, so I'm so thankful for her for helping me out with this. And I want to thank my early readers. So these are people who gave me feedback on my first draft, shared testimonials with me. So Avi here, thank you. My friend Henry, Priyanka, Shiv, and Aditya, who you know through this. So thank you. And I want to thank my family, my mom, my sister, my brother, for just always encouraging me to pursue my wild ideas, and I have a lot of them. And lastly, I want to thank all of you for showing up and being a part of this today, virtual or in person. So thank you all so much. So for people here, please enjoy the food. We have a cake with the book cover printed on it. We should cut it and eat it. And then, yeah, talk to each other, get to know each other. And for those of you online, thank you so much for joining from all over the world. Really appreciate it. Yeah, and if any of you have questions, please email me. I didn't get to meet you, but please reach out, and you'll have my email tomorrow for the post-event email. So thank you, everybody.